The Long Way Home, Chapter 47. Wind at Their Backs, Part 1 of 2. Cadet had nearly gotten used to not needing to skulk down the corridors of the Among the Startides we sing. It had been nearly 6 months since he'd come aboard her, and there was only a twinge of panic at being caught when he saw a crewman. He didn't want those instincts to completely disappear, since they came in handy when he wanted to filch cookies before dinner. Rose and his dad hadn't gotten married or anything, but she sure acted like she was already his mom. Cadet didn't mind that, exactly, since his own mom had never bothered, and had failed to notice that one of her hatchlings had gotten famous out here among the stars. Well, he wouldn't look back, never back to that place. Instead, he looked forward. Mainly, he looked forward to not being in the class with the babies anymore. Well, to be fair, the other first graders were only 2 or 3 years younger than him, but it still galled him that he didn't test into 3rd grade. He always considered himself pretty sharp, but being able to figure out how to live on a run wasn't the same as knowing history, or how to write in commercial English, or seafarer's negotiation. He told himself that his placement didn't mean that Aunt Helen thought that he was stupid, but he still felt like he'd let his dad down. So he studied hard. His dad and Jason and Chandra all helped him, but it was his own will that made him return to those boring books and silly poems. His own will, and the classes that he got to be in where he was the youngest kid there instead of the oldest. Being able to catch on to math was a grand thing, all right, but that wasn't what shone in the boy's heart. It was his time on the station sims. For obvious reasons, the George family didn't let kids actually man ship stations while she was underway. But they did have so many redundant consoles that they could basically simulate her operations at any given time. And even though she was a passenger liner, Nana had some interesting scenarios to put those kids through. He did pretty well at the bridge station, and he was fair in a gunner's chair. But where Cadet really stood out was in the pilot's seat, or at the simulated helm of the Wee Sing herself. He could feel her through his avian feet as she steadily sailed between the stars. She was calm, but she was strong, too, and the scenarios let him simulate making the massive ship dance like he wouldn't believe such a large ship could. Or that is, he wouldn't believe it if he didn't know the strength felt every day he lived aboard her. The other thing that warmed Cadet's heart, though he'd never admit it, not even to himself, was the littles. Everywhere he went in the crew-only areas, he had 3 or 4 extra shadows at a time, though they totaled at 24, and he knew them all by name. In the public areas, his shadows gained temporary additions, and those he tried to remember despite the fact that they would depart with their parents when they arrived at their destinations. It had begun because girls between the ages of 3 and 6 thought that he was pretty and wanted to follow him around just to look at him. But he had grown. He found that his younger cousins and the daughters of the crew were all full of questions and ready to hear even the most far-fetched answers from him. He took a secret, so he thought, delight in telling tall tales at their request, and had quite the fan club as a result. It was on a day that he'd both gotten a pilot shuttle in a simulation and had spun a particularly ridiculous tale that he found his dad waiting for him in the kitchen table in the quarters where he studied in the hours of the evening most days. The old man looked serious to Cadet, and he worked to master his feathers as he asked, "What's going on, Dad?" "A bunch of stuff," Vincent rumbled, "so bear with me." "Start at the first one." "First off, Helen says that you can move on to 2nd grade next week. Good work." Cadet's chest feathers puffed out as he swelled with pride at the simple compliment. He still couldn't understand how other boys take such treasures as their dads telling them good work for granted. Maybe it was because other boys didn't know what it was like to not have a dad. "Thanks, Dad." It was important to thank the people you loved when they did important things for you. Cadet knew that since Jason had shown him how good it was to be thanked. "Next, we got approval from the clan head to let you start putting owls behind the yoke for real. Logged and official ones, I mean. It'll be important when you decide to get your pilot or helmsman qualification," Vincent informed him. Cadet curled his talons under the table and said, "I kind of wish I could make the ship really dance again." Vincent slid an official-looking paper over to Cadet, and he looked at it. It was in his native language and spelled out a name. He pulled light from dark across the top. He read it and said, "Dad, this is a legal name change for me?" Vincent coughed. Cadet's dad sometimes had a hard time saying things with words, but Cadet thought he understood. "Your given name is supposed to be a gift from your parents, not what basically amounts to that one." "This is a strong name, Dad," Cadet croaked. The feathers on his cheeks felt damp for some reason. Cadet was a little like his dad. Saying things with words was hard for him. "Why didn't you give me a Terran name?" "Well, I figure since I adopted you for you, I don't have much business changing who you are. I know a little about the Corvian names I was supposed to run, and, well, I guess I wanted to set this right. For some reason, it was really hard for Cadet to push out the words, "Thanks, Dad." Vincent coughed and then said, "There's one more thing. She's got a new reactor and needs a new name, but you, trans sweetie little lady in chief, will have to settle the name for her. You have to share her, and she's a little ship. But without me taking up my old room, it won't be so crowded. You could probably even remodel her, so nobody has to sleep in the galley when you take her out on short trips." "You're giving up the long way," Cadet gasped. "She's a new ship now, but yeah. Now you'll have to share, but I guess you won't mind so bad." Cadet flung his wings around his dad. The tang of salt water filled the air. The sound of surf churning pebbles competed with the cries of vibrant green seabirds gliding on the wind. And a young Latrey girl stood on a swim dock in the sheltered cove of Wote. Vi had spent the past 5 months since departing among the Startides we sing, after a all-too-brief month aboard her, staring at it longingly from her hospital room window. By all accounts, Vi had been recovering well from a surgery, but she had wanted to go faster. Her mother Sam had decided that they would reside on the Latrey cradle world until she was as recovered as was medically possible. Besides, her mother's science of the family was mainly from Wote, if not another Latrey world in the Star Council. It was only Sam who had the alleged misfortune to fall in love with an R&I trooper when he was on shore leave. Vi didn't really think much about her extended family's opinions of her father, though. She knew he deserved his Stormborn title, even if nobody ever talked about it. What she did think about was that it was finally the day. Well, and truly, it was finally the day when she would swim in open water again. Well, open-ish. It wasn't as though the cove ever got in the least bit rough. Vi let the aluminum crutches that Trundre had machined for her clatter to the dock's wooden boards, pulled in a deep breath, and dove. Bubbles rushed past her head as at long last she felt the water of the sea take her in. Colorful fish darted out her path to hide in craggy rocks and folds of coral as her powerful rudder tail propelled her forward like a torpedo beneath the surface. Her heart pounded joy against her ribs, and she put the thought of her own father naming her a Stormborn out of her mind. She dove to the sea's floor and marveled at the unfamiliar sea life of Wote. The fish, crustaceans, and cephalopods were all strange and wondrous to her, and she longed to learn of them so strongly that it nearly overcame her longing to return to among the Startides we sing. Almost. Today was also the day she'd called her friends from the long way, and Cadet had said in the group chat that they had something important to talk about. She replied that she had news, too. Vi propelled herself to the surface with increasing speed. She thought about her friends and how much they said they depended on her during their journey. They told her that she held them together, that her cheer and cooking and care had kept them going. How could she leave them after that? The surface rushed towards her. She didn't know much about the Star Sailors or about all their talk about honor, but she thought it would be wrong to abandon her friends after they told her all that. She broke the surface, and droplets of water sent light scattering across the distant water, and her slick fur in dazzling sparks. She tasted the fresh air like it was the last breath she'd ever have and dove again. She knew that swims like this would be few and far between when she took up life as a spacer. But that didn't matter much. It didn't matter in the face of how much she loved her friends. Still, though, that was no reason to not savor the moment. The currents in the cove were gentle, the water bracing its chill and clear right to the bottom. And Vi dove and twisted beneath the small waves stirred by the warm breeze before tumbling into pebbly shore. No matter how well the pool was made, it couldn't compare with swimming in a body of water simply teeming with life, brimming with joy. She soaked it all in. She had thought about the past and the future a great deal as she struggled to regain her ability to walk, her ability to run, and her ability to swim. But this swim, this moment, was for the joy of triumph. To the bottom again, and along its verdant contour, then to the surface in a breaking jump, for another jump again, before again moving how she wished, with the strength she wished, at the speed she wished, with no nurses, orderlies, or doctors to tell her she was pushing herself too far. The sun was casting clods over the open sea, in shades of orange and pink by the time she'd had her fill, and she scampered to dry herself and dress. She'd lost track of time and might be late for the group call. "Mama," she cried as she scampered up to the dock without pausing to collect her crutches. "Why didn't you come get me? Now I might be late." Sam helped her daughter wiggle into a floral-printed simple dress and told her, "I couldn't cut that short, sweet salt." Vi flicked her ears at her mother and rolled her eyes just so that she couldn't miss her irritation. "Well, let's hurry back to the cottage." Much to Vi's consternation, Sam set a rather sedate pace as she walked her daughter back to one of the cottages meant for family lodging for the patients at the children's hospital that had been the girl's most recent lodging. No longer. She'd not set foot back in that place. Of course, that meant that she didn't know the way, or so running ahead was out of the question. Unfortunately, so far as Vi was concerned, Sam proved impervious to her daughter's glares, and that opinion was undaunted by how her muscles burned and how heavily she panted by the time they reached the front door. She was, however, pleased to find that her mother had already set up a personal comms-enabled tablet on a stand for her to make the call with. One login and selection of a video call room later, and Vi was looking at Jason, Cadet, and Trundre crowded in together to all being shot once, and all beaming at her. Well, Cadet had a beak, so he couldn't exactly beam, but the way some of his facial feathers were puffed up and what others sticked back told her it amounted to the same thing. "I'm sorry I'm late," Vi said. "It's related to good news, so I wanted to say why yet. Where's Isis?" "You're not late," Jason said warmly. "And you know her. She'll be on when the hour turns over, and not a second before." "I think I know that's because of her dumb school more than her," Vi grumbled. "Duty calls to each heart differently," Trundre chided, but it was kindly chiding. Vi looked at the clock in the lower right-hand corner of her screen and saw that the hour would turn over in less than a minute. She groaned in frustration while Cadet let everybody hear his throaty laughter. He was probably laughing because Vi was hardly ever impatient. But golly, she was excited. She had good news to tell everybody, after all. Just when she was about to burst, the app chimed and Isis Magdalene said, "I see you once again are waiting upon me. I hope my schedule did not cause much consternation." "The tides move as they will, not as men wish," Jason nearly sang. Cadet's news must be good, and Jason must already know it. He was a sneaky jerk like that, knowing what was supposed to be a secret before it was told. At least Jason never spoiled things. "Me first," Vi blurted out. "I was later than normal because I was swimming out in the cove instead of pool for the first time." "That means that you got your full discharge, huh?" Jason asked, and Vi could hear the pride in his tone. It made her chest swell. "Yes," Vi confirmed eagerly. "Last Mama booked passage on the No Farewell is Final among the stars on a rendezvous course for the Wee Sing." "Wonderful," Isis Magdalene called. "Would that I could join now. My path goes a different way for a while yet, I fear." "Mine next, but it's a bunch," Cadet said solemnly. "First I'm not in the baby class anymore." Jason and Trundre scoffed, and the latter of the two told him, "It's not the baby class, and you know that." Vi had heard this argument before on many occasions, and while she thought that Jason and Trundre were right to insist that Cadet not be down on himself for not having good schooling, she also could see why Cadet would find that disheartening. Before the argument could get going again, she cut it. "So you're in the second grade like I am. Wonderful. Sometimes I worry that I'm not catching up very well because of the physical therapy and all." Cadet clicked his beak in a way that Vi interpreted as a snort of laughter before he said, "You're smart at all kinds of things, so you'll be fine. The next news is my legal name is different. Now it translates to He Pulls Light from the Darkness. Dad showed me today." Vi was deeply jealous of Trundre and Jason's ability to jostle and praise Cadet, while all of the children offered their congratulations. "That's a wonderful name." "Last, even though the long way died, her hull was still good, mostly. Turns out Dad had it patched up and bought a new reactor for her, and now she's a new ship. He also said that she's ours, and we need to decide on a new name for her." So that was why Jason and Trundre were in such high spirits. "This is a mighty gift," Isis Magdalene whispered. "Must we name her at the moment? I have a thought towards ways and home, but what do you think?" "Traditionally," Jason supplied, "the ship doesn't need her name until she sets sail on her commission. That'll help us decide on a name, since traditionally you're supposed to name her in a way that reflects what she's for. We can be poetic like the Star Sailors or pithy like Terrans, but really it's up to us and what kind of ship we think it should be." "Mr. Vincent really said she's ours?" Vi asked. "Aye," Trundre said. "I talked to him about it. He's adamant that I can't give my share to any of you two. We all have to own her together." From there, we brainstormed for the next 2 hours straight, with only a couple dozen tangents. In the end, Vi was pleased with what they had settled on, and found herself looking forward to the commissioning ceremony. Vincent had lived life long enough to have seen life from several angles. He'd been around a few blocks and a number of times, and he wasn't too thick to notice a good thing when it was practically flung itself at him. But he had always been cautious. Then again, there came a time when a man tossed caution to the winds and put his heart on the line. A new angle. Familiar in some ways, peace, space of life, shipboard community, fatherhood. But each of those was shown in a new, night. He had the peace of a man who stands amongst others who stand ready. The peace of the vigilant, rather than the peace of the trust in others' vigilance. He had the life of a spacer, but not the solitary life he sought on the long way, in the decades of his grief. Nor was the community found like that of a military vessel that he'd known in his youth before his first marriage, but rather that of a tightly knit small town. Even his peaceful life as a farmer had been set apart from the town, away from the bustle of the day-by-day activities of gathered people, and consequently, his fatherhood of a cadet was colored by more than just the support of his best friends and his wife. It was familiar in other ways, casually regimented, warmly raucous, carefully chaotic. The Among the Startites We Sing needed to both be a ship in good working order and a place for children to flourish, rather for families to thrive. Families. That was why he found himself walking back to his quarters from the machine shop, rolling a steel and silver ring over his knuckles in his right hand. Family. His family was why, rather. His family and the change he was intending on making. Vincent had never been all that good with words, but he found other ways to get his point across. That had its upsides, like giving Jason Cull's old hunting knife, and downsides, like giving a hostile universe a couple of decades of dead pirates, but that was just how he got along in the world. The inlaid fleur-de-lis pattern of silver was a nearly imperceptible bump as he closed his hand around it. When he had a lot to say, he tried to pack as much meaning in what he'd do as possible. And what better way of saying that he wanted to build a future with Rose than to propose to her with a ring made of one of the pirate hunting tools. Swords into plowshares, turning from a dealer of death to a cultivator of life. I promised to not return to that old trade, all in a small steel circle. The steel came from his garrote, one of the things he'd wrought vengeance with most. The machinists had surprised him. Instead of melting it down and casting it, they forged the wire into a beautifully patterned welded ring. The silver was just a material that they happened to have on hand, but the joining of the two metals had said something on its own. It felt like Vincent's heart had taken up residence as he reached the corridor that held his and Rose's quarters. Caution was already going to the wind, so he thought it appropriate to go on and in. In a snap decision, he walked past his own door and knocked on Rose's door. The door slid open to reveal Rose, still in her apron and cook's jacket. It didn't matter to Vincent what she wore. She looked beautiful. She was so beautiful that Vincent hardly noticed Brianna and Penelope at the kitchen table behind Rose. A part of Vincent's mind was dimly aware of Brianna was trying to coax the other woman to eat, but the greater part was more concerned with the sudden absence of caution. "Say, Rose," Vincent said, and was pleased to hear that his voice hardly shook. "Could you meet me by the big view screen in the crew dining room in half an hour? I want to change clothes." "You mean that you know I want out of these clothes?" Rose teased. "You're up to something, you big marshmallow." Vincent found himself grinning, even as a part of his mind that noted details that aware that Penelope had stood suddenly with a stricken look across her face. "You'll have to show up to find out," Vincent said confidently. Well, he was almost sure it had sounded confident. And Vincent caught Penelope's hollow gaze before the door slid closed. He frowned. That didn't seem like a good sign, but the old man was at a loss for what else anybody could do for the woman. Vincent sighed and went back to his quarters, trying to piece together what he'd say. He wasn't good at words, but some were required for what he was about. Cadet was eagerly poring over his math coursework at the kitchen table, and while Vincent was loath to interrupt him when fun and learning intersected so strongly, he said, "Anyway, Cadet, I'd like you to come up to the dining room with me for a little while." "You finally going to do it?" Cadet asked sharply. "You already kiss like you're married." "There's more to marriage than kissing," Vincent scoffed, "and maybe I am. Just you don't go spoiling things." "It'll be nice to finally not get bothered by people wanting to change their bets in the pool," Cadet muttered as he laid down his pencil and stretched his wings. "You better not be gambling on my romance," Vincent chided as he made his way to the bedrooms. "They wouldn't let me bet since I have insider knowledge," Cadet muttered darkly. One change of clothes later, and Vincent was waiting by the view screen, shifting his weight from one foot to another. He worked to keep his tail from tucking in on its own from nerves. How could this set his heart racing more than the many perils he faced in his life, including his recent journey? That was a question he wasn't going to be able to answer on account of his desperate focus on the words he'd chosen. The dining room wasn't as full as it usually was at set mealtimes, but it was never an empty space. The large view screen made it a popular place to read, or sit and drink, or otherwise do something that allowed one to enjoy the beauty of the chaotic colors of the Among the Startites We Sing's reality bubble, colliding with the ravages of the hyperspace sea. It was also a backdrop that quite nearly matched Rose's beauty, and why Vincent had chosen it. It seemed that Vincent wasn't as subtle as he thought he was, standing before the view screen in the blue suit that Isis Magdalene had sewn for him. Various crewmates in Georgia smiled, smirked, or scowled at him as they got out their compads and sent messages. Those last were probably losing quite a bit on the pull. By the time Rose had last arrived, the dining room was full of onlookers. She was breathtaking. Her fur had a healthy sheen, her ears stood attentive, her eyes twinkled with mischief, and she filled out her simple floral-printed dress like a healthy woman ought to. A maelstrom seemed to have taken up residence in Vincent's belly, and his aunt's new location in his throat made it somewhat difficult to breathe. Still, he waited for it to approach. "Quite the crowd," she noted. "They weren't invited," Vincent grumbled. "They're here anyway." "Yeah, well, pretend they're not," Vincent growled, and a light chuckle rolled through the room. Vincent took a deep breath and let it out slowly before he took another to say, "Bear with me. I've been a lot of things in my life. Sailor, farmer, father, husband, huntsman. You know some of that. Most of it. I don't have any secrets from you. I thought when I lost Carrie, I'd never love a woman again. I was wrong." Vincent went down on one knee. Tears welled up in Rose's eyes as she clutched at her heart. "I want to try being a husband again. Your husband, if you'll have me." Vincent opened his hand, and the ring glittered in his palm. Rose reached for the ring with trembling fingers, plucked it from Vincent's palm, and slipped it on with a tearful look of triumph. She nodded as tears streamed down her face, and she mouthed like she was saying yes, 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 but no sound was forthcoming. Rose drew Vincent back to his feet, just so that she could throw herself at him and wrap her arms around his neck. Vincent looked down into Rose's eyes and kissed her. The dining room erupted in a resounding cheer. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked clay of the sporting pitch on the Orcs Command Academy as a biting wind drew dust from the hard-packed running track across it. The sound of boots falling in time mingled with the call of cadence from the instructor and the answering verses from the students as they made their way around the track and kicking up the dust again. They were meant to be having tea and going over the upcoming strategic scenario, but one of the students had been caught trying to cheat by the instructors. Isis Magdalene found herself furious with her classmate. So Quan Nathras and his laziness. She was also furious with herself for not catching him in his deceptions before the instructors had. Punishments only occurred when the students failed to hold one another to account, after all. Her voice was growing hoarse as she belted out the next answering verse of the cadence, and she promised herself that she'd watch her Quan Nathras more closely in the future. Hungry, sweaty, exhausted, and still furious, Isis Magdalene dragged herself into the squat, beige stone flat-roofed building, holding the girls' locker room, looking forward to a cold shower and clean clothes. Unbidden came a bitter and incongruous thought at how unfair it was for their instructor to have run them all the way with them without looking nearly so tired as she felt. She tried not to harbor such feelings, as she felt that jealousy was unbecoming of one who would lead a battle. In all cases, though, her time for dwelling was limited, for the hour in which she was permitted to call those she cared for drew near. By the time she had cleaned herself and donned her uniform, her anger had cooled somewhat. Not enough to stop her from giving Quan Nathras a heated glare as she passed him beneath the shade of the colonnade connecting the locker rooms to the main administration building. Despite its 4 floors, the square building still managed to look squat somehow. The rest of the crew of the Long Way were in all likelihood already on the call and talking about what had happened the week without her. No, they would not do such a thing, yet she still felt that rigidity of her schedule prevented her from speaking as she would. She had a more friendly glance for another classmate, Mary John. "Hail, the giver of names," the boy called her as she fell into step beside him. "I would walk with you for a time." "Good noontide, Mary John," Isis Magdalene said in an affection of cool, regal poise. The boy was the son of potters, and not nobly born, but had his place and scholarship and pure talent for tactics, and was by far and away the best among their friends at the academy. "I tell you once more, you may call me Isis Magdalene. Those of us born to responsibility are not so precious with who may speak our names as many believe. This is the only your thought, because on your world the division was not so stark as in the capital," Mary John said, without glare, for another of their classmates. "Even so, the Commandant Lord has made it clear that we are all yet to come into our titles, and you of all of us should know this well. How many classmates from other cadres were sent to his office for demanding that you speak such unearned titles?" 8, her friend admitted. Yet it matters still. No horns grow from my knuckles, and all will see this whatever titles I should earn. I should think that you have dispelled that mistaken attitude by now, Mrs. Magdalene sighed as her more sympathetic glance fell on her classmate. She had the measure of his spirit, and while he was prideful to the point of arrogance, his mistreatment of her friend had not lasted. Amends were late in coming, delayed by that same pride. Mostly, I should think. Yet the talent runs strong in you, and I would know that shape of my soul. He responded, letting his ire fall away. Again and again you ask this of me, Mrs. Magdalene. Almost, I think, I should simply refuse. Here now, you do refuse me, for you give me jests and answers. I jest not, Mrs. Magdalene sniffed before correcting herself. Just a little. You are the conjurer of smiles, and this is true. Jest, I say, for you and our squadron only smile when I speak. You do not look closely. You sport with my heart, he carried dramatically, in a way that reminded Isis Magdalene of Jesus' overacting. It brought a delighted smile to her face, and that wiped the faux despair from his. Speak well of me to your family, he said as he broke away when they reached the door to the administration building, but not so well that I should disappoint them. I speak only the truth to them, she said in her own private ritual of farewell. She would meet him once more at dinner, but calls were a thing of privacy, and the boy had a far more deep sense of propriety than any of the nobly born students. It struck her as contradictory. He longed for the respect of his peers, but refused to hold himself in equality. She would have to do something about that. Even as the door to the entry chamber was closing behind her, and she drew back at the curtain leading into the administration area, she steeled herself. She knew well how she was regarded by the instructors, by the administrators, by the Commandant Lord himself, and it would do her no honor to let her pride grow her head too big for her shoulders. She displayed little innate talent for soldiery or for command, nor was she the fastest, nor strongest, nor quickest of wit. However, she had been held up as an example of a cadre for dedication, grit, and will on more than one occasion, and her gift made it all too evident that those who spoke such praises were the kinds of people to only speak them when they were true. Steeling herself against such things did little to prepare for being confronted by a tall man with a mostly beautiful scarlet skin, clad in royal green and water blue, with his hand resting lightly on the silver-chased hilt of a ceremonial dagger studded with sparkling sapphires. Your Highness, she gasped as she bowed low at the waist. Marshal General Prince Nathras Eric glanced over his shoulder at the attendant, asking, Is this she? Yes, Your Highness. This is Isis Magdalene, and one of our most promising young ladies. Rise, apprentice lady, Isis Magdalene, for I hear you spent time among the Terrans of the Republic, and I would seek with you if you would speak with me. The Crown Prince of the Exarch Reformation spoke to her in special. Isis Magdalene swallowed her nerves as she straightened, saying, I have great sorrow, Your Highness, for I must offer correction, though you are mightier in wisdom than I. Vincent Freevis was a Terran of the Coalition of Independent Planets, not the Republic of Terra. He has since been accepted as a Republican, but he now stands in honor among 3 peoples. Be easy, young one. I am accounted mighty in wisdom, and this is only because I take correction. I thank you for your honor. Yet I would speak to you of your studies rather than your travels if you would permit such a thing. I would not deny you, Your Highness, Isis Magdalene answered breathlessly. There was an air about the prince, something that reminded her of Irish George, a certainty that his wishes would be met, tempered with the humility she did not expect to find in an imperial family. I see that you had an errand within. Then let us find a place to recline and speak for a time, and not block the entry of this tent. You speak wisdom, O Prince. Let this be as you say. I shall follow where you lead. In short order, Isis Magdalene found herself reclining nervously on a cushion in the building's receiving room, with the prince and only 2 of his attendants. She thought that they were bodyguards. It is not widely known, Marshal General Prince Nathras Eric began as Isis Magdalene worked to swallow her nerves. But in my youth, when our confinement was lifted, I escaped for a year. I spent that year amongst the Terrans in many places. On ships, planets in the Republic, in the Coalition, among the Star Sailors, though Terrans of any kinds are a minority there. I tell you this so that you shall know that we hold a common experience between us. A mighty gift, Isis Magdalene said, and when the prince laughed, she fought to keep blush from showing on her cheeks. Not so mighty. nor a gift from me," he chuckled. "Let formality go. You are in the shade of my tent. I hear from the lips of your instructors that you contend with them often." Isis Magdalene was keenly aware that her sanguine skin deepened its hue on her cheeks as she answered. "To stand aloof is not the only way to preserve authority in those under one's command. To maintain trust by care among them is another way, and I've seen it with my own eyes." "This is so, yet you are not a Terran, and to show care must be in a way your charges can accept," the prince pressed. "My instructors have insisted that I must remain aloof and keep my care hidden." "This is not true in all cases," he answered. "Your instructors are overused to teaching what shall work for most young lords. Few young ladies strive to command men in battle, and fewer still leave another honorable path to test themselves as you have. Your courage is mighty. Yet nigh on 16th of my classmates have no noble blood in their veins. One such has the greatest talent for tactics amongst my cadre. You have might in wisdom beyond your years." Marshal General Prince Narix Eric told her gravely, and she swelled with pride. She ruthlessly stamped it down before it could show on her face. But the prince grinned as if he'd seen it anyway. "I hear also that you began with the lowest scores in all of the tests of physical fitness." "This is so," she admitted. "Yet there is no shame in being weak. There is only shame in remaining weak when one can and must be strong." "And you have," the prince answered. "I did mean what I said. Be easy. You are in my shade." "I have sorrow, your highness," Isis Magdalene said with chagrin. "I cannot help that I carry guilt that I am now late in calling my old crew from the good ship the long way." "Emperor Unchained," the prince swore, and Isis Magdalene's eyes popped at that. "Do not let me keep you from them, for I remember well how strict the Academy is with such things." Isis Magdalene didn't realize how literally she'd taken him until she was already sprinting down the corridor. This would be a story to share with them for certain. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.